Good to see everyone here this morning, and we are glad to have you join us via live stream today. One of the things I've observed through the years is how important persistence is in succeeding in whatever endeavor you may choose to enter. And my clicker is not working. There it goes. Potential, folks, is just potential, okay? A lot of times I think we confuse potential with success, and potential doesn't necessarily guarantee success in any endeavor. It's only when that potential is put to use, when that potential is applied, and generally when that potential is applied in a persistent way, that success comes. Now I say that because as we come to the end of the book of James, James is going to talk about the importance of persistence as he shares God's wisdom with us. And so I want us to begin by looking at James chapter 5, beginning in verse 7 and reading through verse 11. Here's what James says. Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it, until it receives the early and the late rains. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. And you have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. I want us to notice as we get into this, first, two key terms that are used here by James. The first of those terms, and it's used 4 times, okay, in verses 7 through 10 in the Greek, and I want us to look at the Greek for a second because I want you to see a lot of times, and if you've studied any foreign language, and we've talked about this before, you know how difficult it is to take the force of a word in one language and bring it over into another. You can approximate. You can get pretty close. I'm not saying you can't. But it's sometimes really difficult to get the flavor and the power of a term moved from one language to another. And it's certainly that way when it comes to the 2 words that are used here. One of the words that he uses here, that he encourages for us to have, is in the Greek makrothumos, which the English Standard Version will translate as patience. Other translations will translate as long-suffering. Now, that word's comprised of 2 parts. Macro, from which, if you take that K and change it to a C, we see it today when you talk about, for instance, somebody's talked about macroeconomics. Well, if you're talking about macroeconomics, you're talking about economics on a huge scale. You're talking about economics worldwide or countrywide, that kind of thing, okay? Large, big, that's macro. Thumos literally meant temper or anger. And so if a person was macrothumos, you could look at that and go, well, that means they got really angry a lot. And that's not how the Greeks used it. That's not what they were looking for here. What this word meant was it took a lot to get you angry. You had a large temper, okay? You have a slow burn. It takes a long time to get under your skin. That's why sometimes it will be translated as long suffering. A lot of times this word was used in the New Testament. It is of our relationships with each other. How you need to be macrothumos with me. You need to be patient with me. Long suffering. You need to be willing to put up with my idiosyncrasies, and not get too upset about it. But the word also speaks simply to patience when it comes to circumstance, that we don't get too impatient. And in a little bit, we'll look at an analogy that he uses that I think is very appropriate in talking about how macrothumos is often expressed. But understand, 4 times in the first few verses that we just read, he's going to use this term, and I'll point them out to you in just a second. But it's important. You are to have a long-suffering attitude, okay? You're willing to put up with a lot. That's macrothumos. The second word is hupomenos, which is translated, again, the English Standard Version, as steadfast. Now, if somebody's steadfast, what are they? Well, immediately you just think in terms of steady, don't you? This is somebody who's solid, somebody who really hangs in there. But the word itself is fascinating in the Greek. Epo or upo means under, okay? Menos, you bear up. And so literally, the word means, and I love this because it so conveys, I think, the point that James wants to get across. You bear up under. Does life sometimes dump a lot on you? Are there times when you feel like you're bearing a load in your life? All of us face that from time to time, don't we? James says when that comes, and in verse 11 he'll use this word twice. When those times, those difficult, trying times come, I encourage you, when the weight comes on you and you feel like, wow, can I bear this? I want you to bear up under. Whenever I see this term, I always think, what comes to my mind is this picture from, this guy lived back in the, 20s or 30s, something like that. He was one of those renowned strongmen, when he'd go around from city to city, and he would have like a half a dozen people sit on a round table. And then he would get under that table and he would raise it up with everybody on it. And the crowd would ooh and awe, and he would, what? Bear up under, wouldn't he? Hold it there. Everybody, wow, fascinated by the strength of this guy. But that's the picture. That's the idea. And so James is using 2 powerful terms here. I want you to be long suffering, okay? I want you to be willing to hang in there and to persist. When tough times come, I want you to bear up under. Now, there's 3 points. He makes several very important points here, but there's 3 in particular that I want us to consider this morning. And the first one is this. Basically, what he's going to say in verses 7, 8, and 10 is something wonderful's coming. But you're going to have to wait patiently for it. Okay? It's not going to come instantly. It's one of those things that you are going to have macrothumos.